Welcome to the Lead Well podcast. Around here, we believe leadership shouldn't cost you your peace, your well-being, or the parts of yourself you've worked so hard to reclaim. I'm your host, Trasetta Washington, leadership wellness coach and strategist, and my mission is to give you practical, actionable steps to reduce overwhelm, lead more effectively, and build a sustainable rhythm for both your team and your life. Let's dive into today's conversation. Hey leaders, welcome back to the Lead Well podcast. I am really glad that you are here today. I want to talk about something that a lot of capable, committed leaders are experiencing, but very few are really able to name it, and that is survival mode. You wake up already mentally behind. Maybe you're scanning your emails before your feet even hit the floor. You've got 5 unfinished conversations swirling around in your head, and you make decisions quickly because there just isn't the time for you to slow down to be intentional with the decision that you're making. And for many leaders, this is not simply a chaotic week. This is normal. This is what a normal week looks like. We're not talking about crisis. This is their daily leadership. And I have to say this before I move on. If this is you, if you can relate to any of those statements, being in survival mode does not mean that you are weak and that you're not good at what you do. Survival mode often develops inside of strong and very capable leaders, but it's a sign that you've been responsible for way too much for far too long. So the real issue here isn't that you have entered into survival mode. The real issue is that it has become your default. So what does survival mode actually look like in leadership? It can look like you have very little white space on your calendar, or you're constantly having to be responsive to things. You're essentially firefighting all the time. Or when you're in meetings, you're having to take on so much more than what really you should be taking on. You're just simply wearing too many hats because you feel like it's faster if I do it myself. If I delegate it, it's going to take me way longer than I actually have the time to do. And you're fixing problems before your team actually has an opportunity to feel them or even identify that the problem is there. On the inside, you have difficulty shutting off mentally. You think that if you slow down, that something's going to fall through the cracks, that something's going to break. And there's might even be a little subtle pride that is mixed in with that exhaustion, because feeling like you're being seen as reliable, it makes you feel good about yourself. Survival mode leadership often does look competent. That is why it's hard for leaders to pick up on it. Right? Because it looks like you're being productive. It looks like you're committed. It looks like leadership presence. But underneath all of that is pressure, not clarity. You can be performing well and still be leading from a place of depletion. Now, I said that survival mode kind of becomes your default. This happens because maybe you have turnover on your team and you have to step in to fill that gap while you're going through the process of bringing on a new team member to replace the previous one. Or you aren't able to replace that person, and so you just quietly absorb all of that extra work. It could also be because you're growing, but there's not systems to support the growth of your team. There may even be pressure from the budget to make the most out of every single dollar that you have. Maybe you go through a period of crisis or a season of crisis where you take on additional responsibility and never release it again. You just continue holding on to it. Or maybe even there's some change within the organization that requires you to take on more than what you really should be. All of these things are appropriate. And that's where the survival mode typically begins. It begins with something that makes sense, right? It's appropriate for what is happening at the time. It's very adaptive. The problem here is not that you are entering into survival mode. The problem is that you don't ever exit it. It just becomes your norm. It becomes your default. So essentially what happens is you've made these temporary adjustments, but they have become permanent habits, right? So you say, oh, I'll just handle this, or it's a lot faster if I do it myself, or I'll train them later. This project, we're under a deadline. And once this project ends, then I will be able to relinquish that or train them or whatever the case may be. So you end up building a tolerance for high stress, constant urgency, and low recovery. And over time, your nervous system just adjusts to all of that. Your nervous system learns that urgency. Urgency begins to feel normal. And the calm, instead of the chaos, feels like, oh my gosh, I'm being unproductive, right? You start to feel suspicious when there is stillness there. And you start to equate that motion, that constant motion, with leadership. And when survival mode becomes familiar, peace can actually start to feel uncomfortable. Leaders start to believe that this is just leadership. This is just part of my responsibility. It's the cost of being the responsible one. I can handle it. Or even, if I'm not going to do it, if I don't carry it, if I don't pick it up, who's going to do it? And survival becomes a part of your identity. And once it becomes a part of your identity, you stop questioning it. When survival mode is your baseline, your perception gets distorted. You may not know how stretched you are, where your capacity is leaking, or where your team is out of alignment, or where that misalignment is draining you. I created a tool called the Leadership Capacity and Team Alignment Diagnostic. It is a capacity mirror for you. It is a snapshot of your leadership alignment, and it's a tool that can provide you with clarity. This is not to determine whether or not you're a good leader or not. It's about whether or not your leadership structure is actually sustainable. It reveals capacity gaps you may have, the strain that you may have from delegation or a lack thereof, where those alignment breakdowns are, and those patterns that put you at risk for burnout. And if any of this feels familiar, then the diagnostic will help you put some language around it. It only takes about 5 minutes, and you can complete it at the link inside of the show notes. Now, there's a cost to staying in survival mode. There's a personal cost. You experience emotional fatigue. You're not able to be as creative as you normally would be. You start to get irritable or have a short fuse. There's a chronic mental overload that you are carrying. And as a result, you lose the joy. You lose the joy of being in leadership. You stop leading with your imagination. You stop leading with vision and shift into leading through endurance. Not only that, not only does it cost you personally, but there's a cost to your team. Survival mode leadership unintentionally creates bottlenecks. It creates an overdependence on you. You start to delay the development of your team members. There's hesitation in their ability to make decisions because they rely on you so much. And there's this role creep that happens. And your team starts to pick up on your urgency, your attention, that all of that pressure. I talk about it all the time, that your team is a mirror, and they pick up on that even if you never say a word about it. Your team is going to calibrate to your nervous system as the leader. There's also an organizational cost. You create a culture of reactivity. Firefighter becomes normal rather than creating systems to prevent urgent situations or crisis situations, right? That strategic work gets put on the back burner because you've got all these fires that you're having to put out. And your high performers, they just quietly burn out. Sustainable leadership is not a personal luxury. It is what creates organizational stability. Sustainable leadership is leadership that can be repeated without having to be depleted in the process. It is very structured, intentional. It is capacity aware. You're very aware of what your capacity is, and it is supported by the system. However, when you're in survival mode keeps you questioning, asking the question, what is it that I need to handle right now? Whereas sustainable leadership, you're asking the question, what needs to change so this doesn't keep falling on my lap? When you're in survival mode, your focus is on speed, control, output, just getting it done. On the other hand, the focus when you're operating from sustainable leadership is alignment, capacity, clarity. You do not need to become a stronger leader. You're already a strong leader. What you need is to lead from a stronger system. If you can identify with any of the things that I've talked about as it relates to leading from a place of survival mode, again, I want to say you are not failing. You just adapted. You adapted to the circumstances. You adapted to the environment that you were in. You've been responsible. You stepped up. However, survival mode doesn't have to be permanent. You don't have to stay in survival mode. I encourage you to shift out of survival mode and into more sustainable leadership. And if you're ready for that, I want to invite you to subscribe to the podcast. This is what we talk about over here. Stay connected. Over the next several weeks, I'm going to be sharing more about what it looks like to lead from a place of alignment and sustainability. That's all I have for you today. As always, until next time, lead well and live well.